think is the most important is contractual obligations. So companies will enter into an agreement and will, in the agreements, I think in many of our agreements, it says this is confidential and can't be disclosed to anyone else except as required by law. So you sign that and you think, oh, that's great. If I ever go IPO, although, you know, medical device companies are more likely to be sold than go IPO, I can disclose this contract. But what it missed was an exception to show this to a financier or a buyer. And so oftentimes we're about to sell the company and there's a very important contract, like a license of your major technology, and it's confidential and you can't show it to the buyer. And that becomes problematic, and often you don't want to go back to your licensor to ask for a waiver because they want to know why there's a waiver, and they'll be willing to give you the waiver, but you're about to get a big paycheck, so can they share in that just a little bit? So if you can get, this is my pitch to tell you, if you can get good advice up front, I think you should do it. Try to do a sale before an IPO because it becomes a little more burdensome to sell after an IPO, and also because you have maximum leverage before an IPO, which is if you don't buy me now, Medtronic, and I go IPO, you're going to really have to pay more. So often we go on dual tracks. An important thing that a banker can do is create an auction. It's a little more awkward for you to create an auction, but they're very good at that. And in fact, I last year sold a company where the investment bankers were able to create an auction even though there was one potential buyer. I'm not sure they knew there was one potential buyer, but there was. So this poor this poor buyer was bidding against itself. And this is important. You may also want to augment your management during the process, because remember, the people who work for you are busy full-time doing their full-time job. So who's going to write the memorandum, the confidential memorandum? Who's going to do a lot of the legwork? So you may need to get consultants in to help you. But you want a real sense of what you're selling and what are the strengths and growth opportunities for your buyer. And you got to pitch it to the strategic buyer, may know better what the growth opportunities are. Financial buyer may need to be educated a bit more. And you want to also be very upfront about your issues. Doesn't mean in the first date you have to tell all your faults, but if you wait too late, and once they put a price on the table and then they find out about a fault, then they're going to take money off the table. So if you're proactive and you say, here, we need to beef this up, but by the way, I think you can do it this way, I think that's a better strategy. The other thing is it will erode confidence in everything else you're telling them if you hide something until later on. If you're able to address these issues, I would say this is the hardest part of any deal for me, just personally with my client, because the conversation goes like this. We can't give this non-compete, and they say, why? I'm so excited. They're going to let me run a whole division. It's going to be great. I'm going to love it. And I say, because 90% of entrepreneurs want out. They cannot work in a big company with a boss, and you're going to call me in 6 months saying, how do I get out of this? So non-competes become very important. Again, this is for the individual entrepreneur. The company, it's a big conflict. The company may say, sign the lousy thing, we want the sale. And you, the entrepreneur, might say, yeah, but this is going to ruin my life. So we have to work that out. It's part of the whole deal. In 75 to 80% of medical device exits, and there's a bunch of surveys, they're not all complete, so these numbers may be off, but let's say a large majority of medical device exits, there are earnouts. This compares to 10 to 20% of non-life science companies. Biotech companies also have big earnouts. So these earnouts are basically structured like royalties or milestone payments, meaning, hitting certain financial targets, sales targets, regulatory approvals, or they can be a percentage of your EBITDA, revenue, net revenue. Generally, if you're representing a seller, you want to stay away from an earnout that is loaded, that's based on earnings, because they can load in a lot of expenses. And generally, we have to negotiate what expenses can be loaded in, what can't. It's a very long process to do that. A very high percentage of earnouts end up in litigation, or more than 50% of the milestone earnouts are missed and you don't get them at all. So here's where you really need a lot of thought, advice, and concentration. And again, it's a bridge when you can't really get to the right price.